morning, artists. Good to see you. Welcome to my sewing lesson on how to make a stuffie. Now, your stuffie can look however you want it to be. I included in your kit all the things you need to follow along with this video. If you need a little time in between the steps, don't forget you can just pause the video or rewind to watch it again. Okay, so let's start. Let me tell you what we need. Hi artists, okay, let's get started. Let's make our stuffie. So the way we're gonna do this is first gather a few supplies to start off. We need 2 pieces of printer paper, this white paper, any paper you have lying around, that's 8.5 by 11, letter size. We need our little hot dog bun folded piece of paper. You'll find it in your kit. You need your needle, and you need some red thread or whatever color thread is in your pack. For now, just take 1 piece of thread. You also need to gather some scissors for cutting and a pencil for drawing our pattern. And you might as well get out the 2 pieces of felt that we're gonna use for the front and back of our body. And there's an extra one in there you'll see that we're gonna use for arms, legs, and maybe some embellishments like eyes, mouth, and any other decorations we want on our stuffie. So first, just pick out the 2 pieces of fabric you want for the front and back of our stuffie. So my stuffie, I use the same color. You can do that, or you can sub in a different color, 1 for the front, 1 for the back. Okay, starting, we're going to create a pattern. A pattern is something that we draw and cut out and then trace onto our felt to use as a guide for our design of our stuffie. So the body shape needs to be as big as the paper. One thing I notice that artists do when they're making a pattern is sometimes they go small. Now, if you go small with your body shape, when you go to sew it, it's going to be difficult. So let's go big as the whole paper, and let's keep it simple. Mine just looks like a bunch of big blobby shapes, right? You can see, and I labeled my pattern body, and my name is Cascino, so I don't lose it. I'm gonna trace that on the paper. I'm going to cut that out. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my second piece of paper, and on about half of that paper, I'm gonna make an arm shape and a leg shape. You'll see, here's my arm shape and here's my leg shape. That's what it turns out like later. Okay, so I got only 1 arm and only 1 leg, so I'm gonna show you a trick so you don't have to cut it twice to make 2 arms and 2 legs. Now maybe you don't want an arm and a leg. Maybe you want some horns, maybe you want a tail, maybe he just has 1 leg and 1 arm. Do whatever you like. I just would like you to try it sewing at least a few pieces into your body shape. All right. Okay, now our next step is after I've cut out my arm and my leg and my body pattern, I'm gonna take my front and back of my body felt, and I'm gonna use the pins in my pack just to pin a few in there in the center. Now the way I do that, it's almost like I'm making a stitch with the pin. I go through both pieces to the other side and then come back up. This will hold the felt together when I'm tracing and cutting so it doesn't move around. We want the front and the back piece to match exactly. So I'm gonna put 2 pins in. There we go. Now the next step is I'm gonna take my body pattern right here. And if you want, you can also pin your body pattern to the felt. Some people like to do that if you don't want it to move around. I don't know if it's necessary, but I'll show you how you do that too. You can make a hole right through it. Now I'm gonna take my pencil and very lightly, I'm gonna trace on one side of my body felt. I'm gonna trace that shape all the way around. And you can see, I'm not being super careful. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's also not really dark. It's just a guide so that when I'm cutting, ooh, it goes right to the edge, that's okay. Just a guide so that when I'm cutting, I know exactly what my shape is supposed to be. But as you notice, it's not perfect, doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm gonna take this pin out so I don't mess up my body pattern. Repin the two together. See that? Now you can see the shape that I cut out here. Pretty cool. So I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm gonna cut this out. Then I'm gonna do the same thing with my arm and leg pattern. I'm gonna cut those out. I'm gonna put them on my scrap extra piece of felt and I'm gonna trace and trace, okay? Now I wanna show you something about the way that I trace my leg pattern and my arm pattern. You'll see that I did put them a little bit separate. The reason is because I'm gonna trace the leg, kind of looks like a big chicken leg, and then I'm gonna trace the arm, you'll see it here. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this over like that, okay? And I'm gonna pin it with a pin. This way I only have to cut the leg one time, but because it's 2 layers, I'll have 2 legs that exactly match in the end. Let's do that. Now notice I am cutting, it's folded here, but I'm cutting the fold so that I can undo them. And when I unpin this, you see I have 2 legs now that are exactly the same. Now I'm gonna do the same for the arm. I'm gonna save my scraps too. This whole project, it's so important to save your scraps because you might need these colors later. So I put them in a scrap pile. Now see my arm here? Same thing, I'm gonna fold it. I'm gonna pin it like this, and I'm gonna cut out my arm so I have 2 of them. It's 2 layers, see that? And when I cut at the 2 at the same time, they're gonna match. Now, if you don't want your arms to match, if you want one to be a giant, big, floppy arm and the other one to be a skinny, long, little, pointy arm, that's fine too. But this is just a good way to do it if you want the arms to be the same. There we go. And I'm gonna take out my pin. Now, I always put my needle in my pin when I'm not using it. I have a magnet that I like to put it on, and it sticks like this. That way it doesn't fall on the floor and I don't step on it. Ouch. Okay, so if you don't have this, you can always just stick it into a piece of fabric. All right, so here's my scraps. I'm gonna save this. I'm not throwing it on the floor. I'm not putting it in the trash. I'm gonna save it because I'm gonna need it later. Okay, so here's my 2 arms and here's my 2 legs. Here is the body where I pinned it together and traced it. I'm gonna cut this out, making sure I cut through 2 layers just like I did with the arms and the legs. I'm also making sure that I don't make anything too small or too pointy. I can always add those details later with a flat piece of felt. Now, some people ask me if they're more advanced at sewing, hey, can I make my arms and legs so that they're stuffed and not just flat felt? Sure, you can do that. You just have to cut out double of each, sew them together and stuff them. And I'll show you the basic way of how you would sew 2 pieces of felt together so that you can stuff it. Okay, so now I've cut out my body. They're still pinned together. I have my arms and legs on the side. I'm gonna need those in a minute. I'm gonna thread my needle. Now, some people like to sew with the double thread. I'm gonna sew with a single thread. This is a little bit more advanced than the little pouch that we made, but I'm gonna sew with a tail instead of doubling up my thread. The way I'm gonna do that is take my little hot dog bun made out of a folded little tiny piece of sticky note that I cut out, put my hot dog in the hot dog bun, pinch it closed, take my needle, take the eye of the needle right here and put the paper with the thread that's inside right through the eye of my needle and grab it on the other side, still pinching it. Pull it through. Now, instead of pulling it even Steven to the bottom like this, instead, I'm gonna just keep a little tail. Do you see this? Now this tail, while I'm sewing, I'm gonna pinch this part of the eye of the needle so it doesn't come through. Now, if you lose your tail and it goes through the needle, no biggie, just rethread it. as you're sewing. Now don't forget, at the bottom, we're gonna tie a knot, okay? Now you can tie a knot like this. Sometimes with thread, you need with felt, you need 2 knots because the felt has kind of a large weave, they call it. So a tiny knot could just pull right through. So you see the size of this knot is what you need. Okay, I'm ready to sew. Oh, but first I need to put my arms and legs into my body. Now this is a little bit tricky, but watch how I set up before I sew the body. Okay, now I'm going to open up my stuffie. I took the pins out. Now if I want, when I'm finished with this stuffie, if I want his arms and legs to stick out like this, say I wanted the arms to come out, maybe I want them to come out right below and sticking up a little bit. And say I want the legs to come down like this, okay? Now the way I want it kind of like that, yeah. Now the way I kind of set this up so that when I flip my stuffie inside out, the stitches around the edge are hidden and my arms pop right out of the edges. Let me show you how we set this up. We do not sew it like this. A lot of people think we would just put the top on and sew, but we're not gonna do that. Okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna set it up like this, and then I'm gonna flip the arm to the inside. You see how I did that? And I'm gonna leave a little bit hanging off the edge. Now I'm gonna flip the arm to the inside and leave a little bit hanging like this. Same with the legs. I'm not gonna sew them on like this. I'm gonna flip it so they go inside the body, leaving a little bit hanging. Same with this leg. I'm gonna flip it so a little bit hangs over the edge. Now I'm ready to put the top of my body on like this. And I wanna make sure it matches up perfect. Okay, make sure it's not flipped so it's not the same pattern. All right, so everything's matching and I can just see the ends sticking out. Now here's the key so things don't move around while you sew. You have to get a few pins, say 4 or 5 pins. I'm gonna start by pinning through all 3 layers. So I'm gonna start by pinning my arm by going through the orange, through the blue of the arm, and through the yellow, probably about a ½ an inch from the edge, and then come back up. This way, this arm is not moving around while I sew it. Let's do the leg. You see how it's 3 layers here? I'm gonna pin through all 3 layers to hold it in place. Not right on the edge, because I'm gonna sew on the edge. Let's do another one. Here's the leg. You can see all 3 layers. I'm gonna pin through all 3 layers. You can see the other side is pinned. Now I'm gonna pin through this layer. Now, if you have really long arms and legs, make sure that your leg doesn't go over the edge in another spot. So you sew it closed. You wanna make sure that you fold the legs and the arms on the inside middle. Okay, there you go. Mine are pretty short, so I don't have to worry about that. Here we go, I pinned that in there. So now I have all 4 limbs pinned, arms, legs. Now I'm gonna put an extra pin at the top just to hold it so this part doesn't move around while I'm sewing. Easy peasy, okay. Now I'm gonna take my thread and my needle that I already threaded here. All right, with my knot at the end, and I'm gonna start to sew. Now before I start, I wanna plan where I'm gonna leave my hole. I'm gonna leave a small patch where I'm gonna leave it open. I'm not gonna sew it closed all the way. Why do I do this? Because I need to flip it inside out when I'm done and put stuffing in it. Then I'll close it up when I'm done with the stuffing. So looking around, I usually don't wanna leave that hole where the arms or the legs are. I think I'll leave that hole maybe right here, and just about 1.5 inches, not too big, okay? So what I'm gonna do, in my mind, I know I'm gonna sew from here all the way around using my running stitch, or you can use a whip stitch. If you use a whip stitch, it looks like this when you flip it. If you use a running stitch, it's totally hidden. So I'm gonna use a running stitch just to show you what that looks like. Oh my goodness, I got 2 knots in here. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna cut this just because I don't know why there's 2 knots in there and re-knot. Guys, if you ever get a tangle in your thread or things get crazy and it's all like knotted up, or you need to go backwards because you misstitched, just cut your thread, no big deal. And then you can just re-knot it. Okay, so I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna come up through both fabric. Now remember, I like to pretend my needle is a dolphin and my felt is the water. So the dolphin comes all the way up until I feel the tug, right? And then he dives back down. The stitches are small. Now I've seen a lot of artists that I've been sewing with lately, they're in a rush. They're like, I gotta finish this thing. So they make these big stitches, woo, all the way around the edge. Maybe 5 or 6 stitches for the whole thing. And then it leaves these big holes, so the stuffing, the guts of your stuffie is gonna come right out the edge. So you gotta make your stitches pretty small and pretty close together. Now see, I'm coming up on this side. This is the running stitch. Coming up on this side, pulling it through, and then back down again. Now I'm following the curve of my pattern that I cut. I'm not just sewing straight across. If I sew straight across, when I flip it inside out, it'll just be a straight shot. It won't be a curve. Now see, I actually could even make my stitches a little closer together. There we go. All right, so now we're gonna speed through this. So you can see I'm gonna sew all the way around with my running stitch. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this. Slow it down so you can see. Now when I'm getting to the part where there's 3 layers, the arm, the front, and the back, I wanna make sure my running stitch goes through all 3 layers and that my stitches are tight and small and close together. So I'm coming up through here. My dolphin's coming up from the bottom of the ocean. I feel the tug. I go back down through all 3 layers. You see that? Orange, blue, and yellow. Make a tight, nice little neat stitch and come back up through all 3 layers. Because if you miss a layer, when you turn inside out, your arm will fall off. So you just want to make sure that it's nice and tight. All right, and when I pull this through, the stitch should go through all the way to the edge of the arm, and then I just keep sewing. If I run out of thread, no problem. Just tie a knot close to your felt that will hold, rethread with extra thread from your packet and your needle, and keep sewing until I get to here. Okay, now you're gonna see I'm getting to the point where I'm almost to where I started. I just have a little space. So I'm gonna go a little bit further. I'm gonna stop right here and tie a knot, but I'm not gonna cut my thread if I have any thread left. If you don't, if you're at the end, that's okay. Tie a knot and rethread your thread for later when you have to close up the hole. All right, so here I am. I just have this little space. Now the way I tie a knot, and this will be hidden when I flip it, I do a mini stitch. Now a mini stitch, I'm just taking a little tiny bit of the felt, if you can see, and I pull the thread through it right until it's about to go flat, and then I stick my needle through to tie the knot. And you can do that twice. You can do another little mini stitch, and right before I pull the thread all the way through and there's a loop, I stick my thread in and tie a knot. I'm gonna leave this threaded though, okay? All right, now let me show you how we flip this inside out. All right, artists, this is the exciting part. So as you can see, I've stitched all the way around, through my legs, through my arms, and I've left a little space about 2 inches where I tied a knot and I can stick my fingers through. Now, you might be like, how am I gonna flip this thing inside out? It's okay, I took my needle off too, even though I didn't cut my thread, all right? So you're like, Miss Cascino, how am I gonna turn this thing inside out? There's no way. But you can see through the yellow, you can see my arms and legs in there. So now first I'm gonna take out my pins and put them on my magnet. I don't wanna lose my pins. All right, so I'm taking out all my pins. There was 5 of them, so I wanna make sure I take out all 5, because when I'm flipping it inside out, I don't wanna rip it if there's still a pin in there. All right, so you can see where it's knotted where I started and knotted where I finished. Now I'm gonna take this flap and I'm gonna stick my fingers all the way inside until I feel the very bottom of my stuffie, and I'm gonna slowly and gently gonna turn this thing inside out. You'll see it's starting to come inside out. I'm just gonna take my time. I'm not gonna rush. I'm not gonna rip it through. I'm just gonna go real slow, and you'll see the Stuffie is starting to come out. Now I'm gonna stick my fingers through. I can gently pull on the legs to free them. All right, I can gently pull on my arms. If I did a good job sewing, they won't come off. If they do come off, don't worry, okay? We can sew them on later, it's not a big deal. But hopefully you did lots of little stitches so it's held in to your seam. You see how I'm sticking my fingers in there? And there's my leg and my leg. And now I'm sticking my fingers right where the arm was, and any little bumps, I'll stick my finger in there too so that they come out. See that bump? And oh, there's a bump here. I'm gonna stick my fingers in there. Okay, and this guy looks like he still needs to be pulled out. It's too straight right there. So let me stick my fingers in there and see what's going on. There's the bump to come out. See that? Perfect. So there is my Stuffie right now. Okay, that's the front or the back. I haven't decided yet. I think this is gonna be my front. Okay, but he's flat. He doesn't have any stuffing in him yet. So our next step is go inside of your little bag that we gave you and find your stuffing. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your stuffing. You're not gonna take this whole thing and cram it in. You're gonna take a little piece like this, okay? And you're gonna start to put it in. And if it's a really small space, you might even use the back of a pencil to help you, like, or a pen, the back of a pen with a pen cap on it so don't get ink on it. And you're gonna take your fingers and you're gonna stuff the little bits way down into the bottom corners first. See how I'm just doing little bits through the hole? Because I also don't want to rip my hole. So after I finish this and I stuff the whole thing, I'm going to show you how to close it up. Here, I'm going to speed up the video so you can see me stuff this real fast. He's alive! Okay, so I've stuffed everything here as much as I can in there. Now, if you run out of stuffing, if your Stuffie is bigger and you don't have enough stuffing, or you want it to be really tightly packed, you can just cut up an old sock or an old t-shirt and stuff it in there. It doesn't have to be this type of stuffing, okay? So don't panic if you run out. Just stick some old cloth or rag in there. Okay, and you just want to make sure, a lot of people I notice, they don't put enough stuffing right where they're about to close it. It's too flat. So once we have it stuffed and the opening is here, I'm going to fold it in and fold it in. And I'm going to pin it like this. Now this is tricky. You might have to have grown-up help. Maybe not. I like to fold it in so it's nice and neat. And then I stick my pin through as far back as I can so I can whip stitch it closed. Some people like to do a running stitch to close it. I don't mind doing the whip stitch. I feel like it's stronger. All right, so you can see I pinned it closed with this pin. And then I'm gonna take my needle, I'm gonna whip stitch it. So I'm gonna put my needle back on. I can use my hot dog method, or I can just kind of, ooh, see how this is fuzzy? So my hot dog method might be the best way to do this, but let's see if I can just get it through. There we go. So I don't have to tie a knot because it's already in there. And I'm gonna take, okay, so this is tough because I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna whip stitch it closed, and it is through many layers of felt. So it's hard to pull it through because we do have a wide eye of our needle and the felt is thick and our thread is not a super thin thread, but you can do it. Just persevere, push through it, make sure you're through both layers. And I am using the whip stitch. The whip stitch, if you remember from your pouch in the video, I'm going around, careful not to go through my thread to make a knot. I wanna just keep going down the line, going through my front side and out my back side. And then I whip around and go through my front side and out my back side. I'll be taking my pin out when I'm all done whip stitching. Okay, now the important part here is to tie a knot at the end. I'm gonna do one more whip stitch, and I'm gonna, before I pull it all the way through, I'm gonna put my needle through the hole there, and I got a nice knot. I'm gonna cut it, take my needle off, and cut it not too close to where my knot is. I can always tuck the end in later, or hide it. Now I'm gonna take out this pin that was already halfway falling out, and there is my little guy. He is ready for some face. He's ready. Oh, I like how he's kind of crossing his legs. That's funny. Okay, so he's gonna have some eyes, he's gonna have a mouth, and I'm gonna show you how to sew the hair next. Okay, I'm gonna show you how to decorate and make a face for our creature. Now everybody's gonna want their creature to look different. I'm gonna thread this needle real quick. I'm choosing an orange circle from my scraps. See how I saved my scraps? I cut out an orange circle for one part of his eye. Okay, now I could put a button here. I could sew that on. Remember our button sewing skills from our pouch? I could sew a bead on there, and I'll show you how to use a brad in a second. Okay, so same thing. The reason I'm doing a piece of felt to sew the object onto and not just sew it directly on here is because it's hard, he's already stuffed. So kind of an advanced method would be to decorate and sew the face on to this piece of yellow fabric before I sewed it around the edges. But for now, I just want to show you, I wanted to show you the basic body and arms, and now I'm going to cut out a piece of felt for the eye, and I'm going to have him have a green eyeball like this. So again, the way I sew the bead is I have my thread and it's knotted. And again, I might have to do a double knot just to make sure it holds strong and doesn't pull through the felt. If it's a thin fabric, you don't need to do a double knot, but I've learned that I do need to do a double knot with this. I'm gonna, wherever I want my bead to be, I just come up from the bottom, my dolphin comes through the water until I feel the tug on the back when the knot hits. And then my bead goes right on the tip of my needle like this, and I let it fall all the way. And then what I'm gonna do to attach the bead is I'm gonna come around over the edge of the bead, and right next to where I came up from the water, I'm gonna go back down. So I'm making like a mini little running stitch right here. And when I pull this tight, you'll see that the bead actually is held on now by the string. It's held on by one running stitch. Now I can either make the bead sideways like this, or I can kind of tip it to the side. I like it sideways because it looks like the center of an eyeball. And I'm gonna do that twice. I'm gonna come up through my bead, see on this side? And then I'm gonna make sure it's strong. I'm gonna come down on the other side because I like the way the red string looks like on the side of the bead. If you wanna hide the string, use string that's the same color as your bead. All right, so I went right down next to it. Now I have 2 stitches holding my bead on, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tie a knot right behind my bead by doing my mini stitch, pulling it until it's almost flat, but putting my needle through the loop and then pulling it tight. All right, that's a nice knot. I'm gonna trim it, okay? And later, I'm gonna glue this on. Now, if you are feeling like you're an expert, you can also sew, stitch, stitch, stitch around. It's a little hard because it's stuffed. You can also just glue it. Any glue will work. Elmer's glue, a glue stick. I have a special tacky glue that works great that looks like this with felt. So let's see here. I might as well do this. My glue is a little blocked up, so I just take the whole top off. I use my finger to put a little extra on here on the edges. Now this is strong stuff, this glue, so I don't need a lot. And then I'm gonna put my eyeball down like that. There's my eye. And usually glue, any of the Elmer's glues and this tacky glue, it dries clear, so I don't have to worry about it if it gets on me or gets on anything else. All right, so there, and I'm gonna have to let that dry for about 10 minutes before I pick it up and toss it around. All right, and then I wanna show you how to do what is called a brad, and I'm gonna include a few of these in your pack, 1 or 2. And they're all different, they're fancy. You get them at Michael's in the paper crafting section. So I'm gonna cut out, let's see here. I think I'm gonna cut out a little black circle for his other eye from my scraps, saving my scraps. Any scraps I have lying around the house. It doesn't have to be felt. It could be any other material. Maybe you have an old piece of clothing that you were gonna throw out. You could cut a little piece from that, but make sure it's okay with a grown-up first. So to make this look like an eyeball in the middle, you'll see the back is just a sharp point, like a tack. So what I'm gonna do, you can take your needle and poke a hole through it, and just be careful, don't poke your finger, and get a nice strong hole in the middle. You see that? You can see it right through. And I'm gonna take my brad and I'm gonna stick the sharp point through the hole. Okay, you might have to wiggle it with your fingers and flatten it out. You see that? Now to make it stay, because the back is still a tack sticking out, the brad has a special feature. It's actually two pieces. So you're gonna bend one flat and the other flat. And that makes it so it's not coming out from our felt. Okay? And then I'm gonna glue this on too. If you want, you can also sew it on. Either way. Again, I would have sewed it on if I had done my sewing before I had stitched and stuffed the body. But gluing is a good option if it's your first time. You can always get more and more complicated the more that you make stuffies. And you get ideas for the next one. As an artist and as a sewer, you will be inspired and be thinking about your next project as you make this one. Maybe you do something different, maybe you different color thread, different felt, different design. So by making any mistakes that you do with your first stuffy, you can always make more, and now you have the skills. All right, so there are my two eyes, and I can also cut out felt for a mouth. And I wanna show you how to sew some hair next. So I've included in your pack a little bit of yarn. Everybody has different colors. Okay, I'm just using this blue that I have here. So you'll see I added my mouth from another scrap that I had lying around that I cut my arms and legs from. Now, this thread, this is a yarn. You'll see it's a little thicker than the regular thread that we sew with. The way I'm gonna make some hair, and I'll show you kind of what I'm doing here on this guy. See, I made a little bit of hair right here. So it's pretty easy. You can take any yarn. The stuff I put in your bag is probably a long string. And depending on how long you want the hair to be, you're gonna double it up. See how I bent it? And double it up again. And kind of start holding it in the middle and double it up again. And I'm holding it in the middle, almost like a bow. Double it up again, double it up again, until you get to the very end of your string. And this is just if you want one patch of hair. If you want more than one patch, you have to cut your string in half and use 2 and 2. All right, so there we go. There's that. And you'll see I have all the loops here, and I'm just holding it in the middle. Okay, I'm gonna clip it from the rest of my string. Nothing's holding it together now except for my fingers. Ooh, it looks like a mustache when I put it down. All right. So what I'm gonna do is thread my needle, make sure I got my knot going on here. All set. There we go. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put this to the side for one moment. My eyes and my mouth are still drying, so I'm gonna be very careful as I sew this. I'm gonna go to the top of his head where I want his hair. I think I want it right here on the side. And I'm gonna go kind of deep in the felt to hide the knot. You'll see what I mean. When I pull it through, you see that knot? I'm gonna tuck it in. And later I'll cut this shorter. I'll just do it now actually to show you. The hair will hide it anyway, but there we go. So now it's in there. I'm actually gonna do it again just to make it strong. Now I'm gonna take this little bunch of hair, and in the center part, I'm gonna put it on, just lay it right on there, okay, with my fingers. And I'm gonna do 1 or 2 whip stitches. That would be the center part of the hair, or the part. Now I'm using red thread so you can see, but you can use any color thread you have it lying around, or extra that I sent you. Okay, so now see how I'm doing a whip stitch? I'm just going right through again. And when I pull it, this whip stitch is gonna be like the part of his hair. Now I could just do 1 and that's fine, but I wanna make sure it's strong, so I'm gonna come back around again. I'm gonna do it again. 2 times, like this. Perfecto. Now, I could just leave it like this and you could have curly hair, which I like. I'm also gonna tie a knot. Don't forget to tie your knot, because if you don't tie a knot, guess what happens? It just comes undone and all your hard work just falls off. So don't forget to tie a knot. It's definitely tough because you're going through many layers, but it's worth it. Tie that knot. I'm gonna trim it. There we go. And his hair is on. Now, if you like it curly, just with loops, you can leave it like that. If you want to give him a little haircut, just put your scissors into the loop and cut one time. Maybe he has straight hair on one side and curly on the other. I kind of like that. Okay. So there is my Stuffie. Here's his legs. He's quite a character, and I'm sure yours is too. If you want, please take a picture of your Stuffie and upload it to Google Classroom. I'd love to see it. And on this video, at the end, you'll see some of the Stuffies that were made in school by artists. All right, thank you, artists. I'm sure you're gonna have a blast doing this. And if you have any leftover felt, you can do the bag too. And don't forget to keep going. Even if you make a mistake or you feel like you messed it up, keep going and then start again and make a new one when you're all finished. Because you always learn from your mistakes in art. And I have to say, sometimes what I think is a mistake is actually making my project better. So these guys are buddies, and they're gonna hang out. Aw. All right, artists. See you later. Bye.